So by now, most everybody knows that Chadwick Boseman died at 43 years old, and he died of cancer. I can only really speak about this from a comic book fan's perspective. Obviously, I don't know Chadwick Boseman on a personal level. I never did. I never met him. I always thought it'd be kind of cool to meet the guy who played Black Panther. But I think I can speak for especially the Black community and comic book fans that the loss of Chadwick Boseman is big. It's a big loss in a lot of ways. Just from the Black American perspective. I always saw Chadwick Boseman as part of the trinity of young Black actors in Hollywood, right? John David Washington, Michael B. Jordan, Chadwick Boseman. The three most talented young Black actors in Hollywood, right? They are wildly capable in terms of their abilities. The kind of passion and the kind of talent they brought to the movies that they made was incredible. But from a comic book fan's perspective, the loss of Chadwick Boseman is huge because he played Black Panther, right? A little bit of history here. For the Black population in America, comic books were always a bit of a rough patch. Back in the 40s, I think it was, you had a line of comics, or really just like a singular comic called All Negro Comics. It was a one-shot, right? And it was just circulated among the Black community, right? You didn't really see it anywhere else. In the mid-1950s, a guy by the name of Don Rico wrote a very short series called Jungle Tales, which focused on an African king named Watu, I think it was. And then you go into the 1960s, right? The 1960s gave us things like Sam Wilson, right? 1969. It gave us Black Panther's first appearance in Fantastic Four number 52 in 1966, right? You got Luke Cage in the 1970s. You saw Black characters appearing more and more. But in comparison to people like Sam Wilson, and in comparison to people like Luke Cage, Black Panther he stood alone, right? He was a wholly different beast. Because with Sam Wilson, he was a sidekick to Captain America. With Luke Cage, he was an aspect of the Blaxploitation genre, right? So he was your stereotypical Black gangster from the ghetto, right? Is basically what he was. With Black Panther, it was a whole different beast, right? Because when he was introduced in the old Fantastic Four comics by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, he wasn't introduced as some kind of Black gangster, right? He wasn't introduced as like a stereotype or sidekick. He was introduced as the king of an African kingdom. He was a king of the most technologically advanced kingdom in the entirety of the world, right? The way his country was depicted back in those old Fantastic Four comics, and even now, the way it's depicted, it would take the rest of the world 100 years to catch up. And assuming that it did, Wakanda would be 100 years beyond that point, right? So humanity would never catch up with Wakanda. But one of the most notable things of Black Panther is he was the first Black Black character to have his own publication in a major publication, right? Dell Comics had Black superheroes who had their own comics despite being short-lived. But in terms of the big two, right? Marvel and DC, Black Panther was the first one, right? He appeared in Jungle Action. It was written by Don McGregor. And this introduced the villain Eric Killmonger, who's probably one of the most interesting villains in the history of comics, because when you look at him, he was part and parcel to the Black Panther mythos. If the mindset of Marvel at the time was, let's introduce a Black character who's not some stereotype, but instead pays homage to the history of Blacks in the world, right? Like Africa, African kings, right? We pay homage to all that. We also basically introduce him as a guy who's wildly intelligent, and then we in turn create a villain to face off against him. Let's do the same thing. And so Eric Killmonger was a wildly intelligent guy, right? He wasn't just your run-of-the-mill villain who ran up on Wakanda one day, beat Black Panther, and then took over. No, he had a blood feud, right? He had a grudge against Wakanda. There was history there. There was build up there. More so than that, unlike the movie and the comic books, Eric Killmonger didn't beat Black Panther when T'Challa was normal. No. He beat Black Panther despite the Black Panther's powers. That was one of the things that made Eric Killmonger so wildly capable. Imagine that if in the movie, Michael B. Jordan's character had defeated T'Challa despite all of his powers. That's what made Eric Killmonger so cool. The fact that he had degrees from like MIT and different things like that. He was just a super intelligent guy. But the long and short of this is that when it comes to the Black Panther mythos in Marvel Comics, for a lot of Black Americans, it's incredibly important. There's a lot of incredibly important history there because inside the comic, you have Black Panther, who's the king of a nation. He's got a rich culture and an even richer history. And for a lot of Black Americans who over the years had seen what seemed to be the proud culture of African society kind of being removed from American society, they were losing touch with their roots. And being able to see that kind of history brought back and reinstated among the black population was incredibly important. It was incredibly huge, right? When Marvel announced a Black Panther film, Right? You guys all remember that Phase 3 video that was made, that somebody recorded it, and it was the biggest thing ever, right? You know, you got Kevin Feige up there on stage and saying, hey guys, let's talk about Phase 3, you know, Phase 4, whatever it is, you know, let's talk about the new movies that are going to be coming out, where you get Carol Danvers, we get this, we get that, so on and so forth. And they announced Black Panther.
So here we have 3 existing franchise characters, 1 new one. So I think it's time on November 3rd, 2017, to announce a new one. You guys want to see a new character for the first time in the cinema? Okay. Here he is.
And the top plum came off that place. It was nuts, right? People were going crazy. And it was like, oh my God, Black Panther, you know? And so from there, the pressure was on, because now you're talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe introducing what is probably the single most important Black character in the history of Marvel Comics, which hits in a couple different ways. One, it hits the Black community, and it hits comic book fans. As comic book fans, we are not a forgiving breed of people. If you take a character that we love and you put him in a movie and you screw it up, we'll never let you live it down. Right? We will never go see that version of that character again, and we'll scream on social media and the whole 9 yards, but you will know. It's like when a woman gets a pair of pants that have pockets, right? Like, they'll make sure you know, right? That's kind of how it is. And so, you know, when we saw his character introduced in Civil War, that was a taste. You know, to me, it was a sampling, right? We just got to see like what Black Panther would look like in action. And it was cool for what it was. My mind was on the movie, right? What's Wakanda going to look like? What's the culture going to look like? What's the Dora Milaje going to look like? What are all these things going to look like in movie form, right? So we finally get around to the release of the film. We get around to opening night on Black Panther. And I was so excited. I was so hyped, right? I was just like, oh my God, this is gonna be amazing. Like I have no idea what it's gonna be like. This movie could either do really well or it's going to bomb. It's not gonna be an in-between film. It's not gonna be one that just did pretty decent. Like it's gonna do great or terrible, right? There's not gonna be an in-between here. Get in there, sit down in my seat. 2.5 hours later, I come out. It was amazing. It was amazing. It was an adventure. The storytelling, the depth of the characters, the depiction of Eric Killmonger by Michael B. Jordan, and Chadwick Boseman's portrayal of T'Challa, the accent, the whole 9 yards. And I understand that he's playing a character that was written for him on a screenplay. But at the end of the day, it really kind of does come down to that actor's interpretation of the character. Those are words on a page. Right? And that's the biggest issue that I have to imagine Chadwick Boseman had to contend with in playing the role of Black Panther. Unlike his biopic, where he was playing James Brown, he's got interviews and concerts to reference. He can pick up on those mannerisms, the way in which he dances. He can talk to people who knew James Brown when he was alive. There's a lot of experience he can gain there. With Black Panther, he's a character who's the method in which he speaks, the way that he looks, how he moves, changes from one comic volume to the next, and it changes from one writer to the next. No one writer's depiction of Black Panther is the same as another. It is insofar as general themes, the king of Wakanda, protecting his people above all else, different things like that, but how he talks, how he carries himself, it changes. It fluctuates. There's no universal standard by which Chadwick Boseman could sit down and analyze the character. He just kind of had to read over whatever comics were presented to him by whoever presented those comics and then try to adapt the character as best he could. And he did it in spectacular fashion. He did it in incredible fashion. It was incredible to see. And that in and of itself is the tragedy of all this, right? Chadwick Boseman was one of the single most talented actors that Hollywood had to offer. And he was a proud member of the Black community. It was so great to be a part of the Black community and to see him out there like that. Portraying these landmark characters, right? The Five Bloods, to show his character in that movie was incredible. To see him play in the biopic of James Brown and to portray the history of that character was incredible. And to see him play Black Panther from a comic book fan's perspective was incredible. And I firmly believe that Hollywood is diminished without Chadwick Boseman, because that's the kind of talent he brought to the films that he made. And it's so tragic to see such an incredible talent, to see that end in such a terrible way, to see it end at the hands of cancer. Because the guy was at his prime. The guy had nowhere to go but up, right? I mean, it's awful to see. It really is. And from a comic book fan's perspective, which again is the only real insight I can offer here, but from a comic book fan's perspective, it is a massive loss, because from now until forevermore, no matter who it is that plays Black Panther, it will not be Chadwick Boseman. It will not be him. And that's going to suck. Anytime I sit down and watch the original Black Panther film, it's going to be sad, because he'll never play that character again. We'll never see him play that character in that way, to make that character his own, because, I have a hard time believing anybody's going to be able to live up to that. And that's the pressure for all the other actors out there. A guy who's so ridiculously talented that it's scary played one of the most iconic Black superheroes, the most iconic Black superhero in the history of comic books, and passed on. Good luck to whoever's going to take over that role next. You got big shoes to fill. But in the moment, I want to focus on Chadwick Boseman. I just want to say, if I doubt the members of Chadwick Boseman's family are ever going to see this. I doubt that's ever going to happen. But if they happen to, I don't know you. I've never met you. I never met Chadwick Boseman. Never talked to him once in my life. I would love to have been able to do that, but never talked to him once. But understand the loss of him, despite not knowing him on a personal level, even if only knowing him from what I saw in a movie, hits hard, because he was so talented. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Now we'll catch you all later. Peace.